Good morning. It is good to be with you this morning. If you are visiting with us, we're glad that you're here. I hope that you'll take the opportunity to stop by the round table and fill out a visitor's card and drop that in the plate there. We'd love to have a record of your attendance. We love the fact that you're here. If you're online, we're going to ask that you go ahead and fill out the connection card that you find there. If you're visiting there, we are glad that you're here and would love to say welcome in the comments. And so ask that you check in there. Glad that all of you are here and participating at this particular point in time. Spring Creek is a place that you'll see Jesus, and I love that about this congregation. We continue to come back. It looks like we continue to fill in. We're going to have to take a look at our spacing a little bit, but I'm just so glad that you are here and that you continue to connect. And again, I placed this up there. You've seen it multiple times, and it's actually changed. And I need to change this one. But make sure that you're finding a place to connect and that you continue to connect. It is important to be connected to the body of Christ. We talk about sharing life. We've done a good job at sharing life. I want to make sure that we continue to be involved with one another. I'm going to ask you this morning to turn over to Romans chapter 13. To Romans 13. So, we have been working our way through the book of Romans. And there is always sort of the temptation to cherry pick what it is that you want to preach. And the power of preaching through a book is that you commit to covering everything that the writer has covered. And you commit to preaching the whole counsel of God. So this morning, we talk about the fact that living by faith honors God's authority. Two things I want us to remember this morning. One, we are talking about matters of faith and what it means to live by faith. What is it to be Christian in the culture in which we live? What is it to be people of faith living in a world that needs to see Jesus and needs to see what it is that Jesus does? How is it that we do that? One of the ways we do that is that we honor God's authority. God is in charge. And so as we enter in this morning, we enter in to a discussion saying, how is it that we live out honoring God's authority in the nation or in the nation that we live in? Now, the general rule is do not in public places speak about politics or religion. Charles Schulz, who drew Charlie Brown for years, said that he believed that there were three things that you ought to avoid: politics, religion, and the Great Pumpkin. But we're not going to deal with the Great Pumpkin, so I'm going to follow part of that. But we are this morning going to talk about politics and religion. Albert Einstein said, those who do not mix politics and religion understand neither. That the two do actually have something to do with one another. And the two do actually have an important part to play in who we as Christians are as we live out faith. And so this morning we come to Romans chapter 13 where Paul's going to talk about how do we live by faith in the political arena. Now, the political arena that we deal with is going to be sort of a wide spectrum as we look at history today. And so I want you to understand that we're going to be talking about several different things, but it has practical application for us, and we're going to get there, okay? Now, the thing that we do when we talk about politics and religion is we submit, I think, to a principle first, but we submit that principle sort of with a built-in caveat. Chapter 13, verse 1. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. That's pretty easy to understand, right? Except what I have found is that because of where we live or because of who we are as Americans, because of who we are as Christians, because of who we are that we have a tendency to add another Bible verse right after that one. Okay? You know which one that is? That we will obey God rather than men. Acts 27. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we get there, before we add anything to that passage, I want to discuss first the foundational teaching that Paul and Peter, if we match the two up, but Paul specifically this morning gives us in this place. Okay? So before we jump to, I obey God rather than man, I want us to understand that in context. But to get the context, we discuss the foundational teaching first. Does that make sense? Foundational teaching is this: let every person be subject to the governing authorities, period. That's where he stops that one. Next, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. So, here's the basic fundamental teaching. Government is instituted by God. Now, we can talk about this in 2 or 3 different ways. That God, as sovereign over all human events, says government's a good thing. That government is a necessary thing. In fact, Paul will say that God institutes government for 2 reasons. One, to promote good conduct. That's what he will tell, that's what Peter will talk about. To promote good conduct, to punish the wrongdoer, is what Paul says. And he says this is the idea of what a government is supposed to do. That God institutes government to promote good conduct, to punish the wrongdoer. I think there's some interesting things about this. What the government is not supposed to do is it's not supposed to be a means of salvation for the people. That's the job of the church, to share Jesus that way. Okay? We hope the government honors God. We hope the government follows Jesus. We hope the government does all of those things. But God institutes government to promote good conduct, to punish the wrongdoer. Okay? When Paul writes these particular words, the question is, does Paul write them in Nero's first 5 years or in Nero's after the first 5 years of Nero? See, the first 5 years for Nero was a pretty good emperor. He had his mama there, and she helped him to lead, and he did all right. But after 5 years, he put his mama to death, and then he went off the deep end. Okay? That was the beginning of his trouble. In fact, in 58, just 2 years before he put his mother to death, he attempted to abolish all taxes. Okay? When we come to Romans 13, 2 of the caveats that people often bring in, or 2 pieces of baggage people often bring in, is, well, Paul wrote while Nero was still good, and it was easy to submit to governing authorities. Fine. You can believe that if you want. I don't. Because Peter most definitely wrote when Nero was not good. Peter wrote when Nero was burning Christians, when Nero was persecuting the church, when Nero was having you dragged out of your homes, when he was throwing Christians to the lions, when he was burning them to light the fires of his table, when he was doing all of that stuff, Peter said, honor the emperor. And there is no question that he was talking about a bad emperor. Okay? Well, some say that the passage in Romans 13 was written to tell Christians to pay their taxes because taxes were going up. Okay, if we believe that, then that doesn't happen until after the death of Nero's mom, and Nero is persecuting Christians, and he's throwing them in the lion's den, and so, you can't have it both ways. What do I believe? I believe it doesn't matter. When in Nero's life Paul wrote, that Paul would have written the truth at any time in his life, and the truth is, God instituted government. God did it to promote good conduct. God did it to punish the wrongdoer. Right? So now we jump to what? The question comes up, well, what if we live in under an ungodly government? Hold that thought. We'll get there. I don't want to go everywhere all at once. Let's do the foundational teaching first. Foundational teaching that Paul says is God institutes government. And I think that's just pretty clear. I think that's just pretty plain. That in His sovereignty, He says government is intended to be a good thing. Government is intended to be something that promotes good conduct and that punishes the wrongdoer, right? So, we pick it up in verse 5. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. So, Paul's now going to say that the Christian response to government is as follows. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God. That's hinting to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. Paul says that the Christian response to the government, to any government, is to submit to government. To understand that government has a place in the hierarchy of creation. Okay? That God has instituted governments to be over folks. And that's in that place. And that you and I don't stand in the same place as government. I am an American, of the people, by the people, for the people. We're going to talk about that. Don't get off track. The fundamental teaching is Christians first seek to submit to government because it is God instituted. Make sense? We are to pay our taxes. Okay? Now, when we look at the Greek word for tax here, this is the Greek word that the Romans would have used for a direct tax. Okay? This is your income tax. All right? This is what you have to pay based on what... This is, we would call it a poll tax. We don't always like to think about poll taxes in that particular way. This would be your personal property tax, okay? He says pay revenue. This would be what we call an indirect tax. This is sales tax. This is the reason you go to Walmart, you buy $100 worth of goods and it costs you $108, okay? Because it's based on what you buy. So this is the place that's in question under Nero. Nero makes customs and sales tax and all those kinds of things skyrocket. But he addresses all kinds of taxes in this particular deal. Whether it's direct or indirect, Christians pay their taxes. Why? Because Christians honor the government. Why? Because in honoring the government, we honor God's authority. If God instituted it, we honor that authority. We don't have a problem with that in other places. God institutes the covenant of marriage. Do we honor marriage? Yes. We honor marriage among all. Children are expected to honor their father and mother. We place value on that. Now remember, that's what honor means. We place value. See, when Paul talks, he says that's one of the things that you do. You give respect to the government because in respecting the government, you respect God. You give honor to the government because we value what it is that God has put in place. We value what it is that God institutes. We value those structures that God says are good things. All right? So here's the framework of Romans 13, 1-7. God institutes government to serve a specific purpose, to promote good conduct, and to punish bad behavior. Christians are supposed to submit to government. That our first response to anything that the government does is to say, how can I surrender myself to that government and to that place? Right? How many of us like to pay taxes? All right, great. The text doesn't say you have to like it. The text says you have to do it. Right? There's a lot of things that I don't like that I do because it's necessary. Because God calls for it. Okay? If God didn't call for me to love my neighbor, there are neighbors I would not love. I get it. There are things I do because God calls me to. Because they are transformative for me. Because they are impactful in the world. But mostly because they honor who God is and what God tells us we ought to be. And we want to be a people who honor God. So, we submit to government. We pay taxes, we pay tolls, we respect the government. Now that's a choice that we do. And I want you to understand that. That Paul doesn't say respect governments who deserve respect. Paul says respect the fact that governments are in place by God. Understand that they are a God-given institution. That you have to honor them. You have to find value in what they do. You have to find value in what they are. So the Christian is tasked with submitting to government. That's the basic teaching. The basic teaching is pretty simple. Government is instituted by God. Christians submit to government. Okay? So now we deal with some of the questions. So we deal with some of the challenges of following the basic teaching. What if we live under an ungodly government or an ungodly authority? Okay? Let's start by doing this. Romans 3:23 says, "Every man sins and falls short of the glory of God." So, what that tells me is that every man who's involved in any sort of an institution is going to be a man who sins and falls short. Does that affect what he does while he's in office? It does. It affects what we do in the office of parent. It affects what we do in the office of friend. It affects what we do in the office of deacon and in the office of elder. It affects what we do in the office of mayor and governor and representative and senator and president and ambassador and you name it. It's going to affect that. Okay? When we deal with the idea of ungodly governments and authority, we deal with the idea that all governments are marred by sin. This is not a new concept. God gives us something good, like marriage. And man takes marriage, and because of his brokenness and sin, he distorts marriage. God gives us something good like sexual relations. And man, because of sin, distorts that. God gives us something good like a mouth to speak with and to encourage and to offer praise. And man distorts that and makes it a lie and makes it a discouragement, we take the good things that God gives us, and because of the sin that we struggle with as humanity, we distort those things. Does that make sense? The government is not exempt from that. Okay? Oh, but Bill, we're not talking about just distortion. I mean, what about Hitler in Nazi Germany? And what about Stalin? And what about Idi Amin? And what about Pol Pot in Cambodia? I mean, we are talking about regimes that dealt with ethnic cleansing. And we are talking about regimes that murdered millions. And we are talking about those are ungodly institutions. God understands ungodly institutions. You can look in the Bible and you can see the evil kings of Israel who led their people into idolatry, who denied social justices to God's people. And what was God's expectation of His people? It was to submit to the governing authority. It was to act well. It was to follow the law, right? So, when we deal with that, what we deal with really is we deal with such passages as 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. And if you want to turn over there, 1 Timothy 2, verses 1 and 2, we begin to read. "First of all, then I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way." Our response to ungodly government is first and foremost to pray for godly government. And Paul doesn't seem to say pray that they go away. He said, pray for those in high positions that we may lead a quiet and godly life, dignified in every way. May we be people of conduct who stand in that government and show them that there is a different way to live, to show them there is a different way to act. Let us be a means by which transformation can happen in human institutions. Let us face the evil as the people of God to stand up and say, we will do what is good, and we will do what is right. and we will be the people of God in this place. I am afraid that sometimes we jump to a conclusion that because a government is in some way ungodly, that gives me a right to throw out the baby with the bathwater and to claim that everything is all wrong about everybody in that party, in that country, in that specific situation, in that what, and we're just gonna deal with that. Is not the biblical response to ungodly government. The biblical response to ungodly government is to pray for kings. And you pray for them in such a way that you say, may we be such an example that their heart will turn to God. May we live such a godly and dignified life that the world has to take notice and do something different. Or at least do something about it. Okay? That's our response to that. Well, okay, but we obey God rather than men. So there comes a point in time when you have to defy all that's there, and you have to defy everything, and you have to, and so what do we do about that? What do we do about obeying God rather than men? I would caution us first to read the quote before we put anything in there. The first thing it says is that I will do what? I will obey God. What does God say about government? Submit. The first way that we obey is to submit. I obey God rather than men. That's right. In an ungodly government, when they're doing what's wrong, I'm going to obey God. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to be the right person. And I'm going to say the right things. And I'm going to do that in a way that's not scary. I'm going to do that in a way that's not going to be over the top. I see, I'm going to take my example from biblical people. All right? When I obey God rather than men. I'm going to look at the examples of Daniel, who, when we look at it, is threatened with death by lion because he prays. He is a direct assault on his faith. That they couldn't find any other reason to catch him. It's a direct assault on his faith. If you pray, we're sending you to the lion's den, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you do not bow to an idol, it is the fiery furnace for you. Those are the consequences, right? And then there's a whole chapter about how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego went all around and said, oh, isn't it terrible what they're going to do? Oh, isn't it bad? Those people, I got to drum up a support committee. We got to sign a petition. We got to... That's not the way Daniel reacted. Not the way Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego reacted. I'm not against social movements. I am concerned that we jump to places without stopping to say, what is the most godly way to do this? And what is the spirit in which I am called to do this? How can I look like Jesus while participating in the government? How can I live by faith in the political arena of my time? If I look at how Jesus did it, Jesus was falsely accused. Jesus was condemned to death on a cross. Jesus said nothing as he went to the cross. He accepted what the consequences were, and he dealt with it, and he trusted God. In fact, that's the way they all did it. See, they committed to good conduct and righteous living first. Daniel, you can't pray. Daniel went to his room, opened the windows, and prayed. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the trumpets will blow and the band will play, and you must fall down and worship. And all of the people fall down and worship, and there stand Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up like sore thumbs in the face of the Babylonians, because they are committed to good conduct and righteous living. We will put you to death. We will throw you in the furnace. You are going to die. And the boys, you do what you're going to do, and we're going to do what God wants us to do. And God will do what He's going to do. And if that is save us, great. If it is not, okay. But we are going to knowingly accept the consequences of our actions. Paul preached in places where he knew he would go to jail, and he went to jail. Paul preached in places where he knew he would be beaten by government officials, and he went to those places and he preached, and he was beaten. Paul knew what it was to face judgment. He committed to doing what was right. He committed to doing what was good. And he knowingly accepted the consequences of his actions, and all of them trusted God for the outcome. That God will take care of. In the previous chapter of Romans, Paul says, don't go seek vengeance. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Seek to live peaceably with everyone. And that hasn't changed in regards to how we deal with government. Even when they are ungodly. To obey God rather than men is to understand that we first seek in every place to say, can I do that and still be Christian? And if I can, then that's where we're at. Do it with dignity. Do it with godliness. Right? If there are consequences to me being Christian, then what do you need to be willing to do? I got to change the system. No, you got to accept the consequences. That's what changes the system. Okay? Not in America. The vote changes things in America. And then we come down to it. What does it look like to, I'm going to skip Ephesians for now, to live by faith in the United States? Because we live in a system where we as a people get a right to have a say. And so as Christians, we get a right to have a say as to who is in the office of president, or who sits in a senatorial seat, or who sits in our local school board, or who sits in the governor's office in the state of Texas for us. We get a say in that, don't we? We get a chance to participate. We get a chance to have a voice. And I think that if we're going to live by faith in the United States, we have to understand that it is a God-given opportunity for impact. That your vote and your participation in government counts for something. God has given us the opportunity to speak and to make an impact. And so we have to be a people who say, what kind of an impact needs to be made? What kind of an impact do we need to take into the voting booth? What kind of impact do we take? Now, I understand that there are Christians who do not believe that participation in government is something that should happen. In fact, if we look back at history in our own movement, David Lipscomb wrote long and hard about the fact that Christians should not serve in the military, that Christians should not vote, that Christians should not serve in government. He was writing, and writing back to him was a member of the church who would eventually go on to serve as President of the United States. But there's a conflict here, and I get it. I want you to know that what I think Paul and Peter will put out there is that we have a God-given opportunity for impact. But if you choose not to, I will not sit in judgment of you. Because I understand that you have to follow the dictates of conscience where you believe Scripture goes. Just make sure that what you're living is what you have studied out and not what is the easiest path or simply your greatest desire. Okay? Make sure that you can look and say, I believe that God is saying yes, or I believe that God is saying no. Because that's the requirement for us. This is a God-given opportunity. What are we going to do with it? We're going to follow where God leads. We're going to vote in such ways that we believe have the greatest impact for the presence of God in those offices and in those places. We are going to vote in such a way that we believe that good is promoted and that good is advanced, because we have an opportunity to speak. And I believe it is an obligation, a duty for the Christian to participate in every way that they can. I'll encourage you to start now to study issues, to study platforms, to study what it is that's going on, in order to make an informed decision when it comes time to vote in this country. Because living out faith and living by faith in America is a God-given opportunity for impact. 2, I believe it challenges the Christian to seek truth, to be biblical, and to display humility. Because even in the United States, our government is marred by sin. See, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people means that people are involved in every process of that, and so sin has a chance to influence every part of that. And so I think that it's important for us to remember the tools that God has given us and the way that God speaks to us. We give Abraham Lincoln credit because in 1840, I've got it written down, he wrote the Gettysburg Address, which he wrote that government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. Where did he get it? He got it from John Wycliffe, who translated the Bible in 1346. And in the prologue of John Wycliffe's translation of the Bible, 1384, prologue to the translated Bible, he wrote, "The Bible is for the government of the people, by the people, for the people." See, Wycliffe understood that if we're going to participate in life, it has to be at the guidance that God has given us, no matter what the arena. When we step in to deal with political stuff, we are challenged to seek truth in those places. We are challenged to be biblical in our thinking and biblical in our action. And we are challenged to display humility for one another and for the world. In humility, we say, you are better than I. Your argument has to have some sort of merit, or at least be willing to listen to. But it all gets to be judged based on biblical truth, based on the character of God. See, we are a people who understand in the process we are presenting to the world a way to think, and a way to live, and a way to believe. The most important thing that you are when you enter a voting booth, a political discussion, social media, is you are a representative, an ambassador for Christ. Be humble. Be truthful. Be biblical. See, living out faith, living by faith in the United States, allows us to debate issues. It does not allow us to denigrate individuals. Freedom of speech is not freedom to slander, freedom to steal, or freedom to slaughter. And we've seen all three of those things used in the name of freedom of speech on the news. That is not the Christian response. And it's not the Christian place in politics. We are allowed to debate issues. But if you have to devolve into name-calling, stop. Jesus called the Pharisees whitewashed walls. Yeah, He did. He used an expression, "you brood of vipers," to show that what they were doing was spreading a type of poison, was practicing a kind of hypocrisy. But I want to remind you of this too, that the same men that Jesus said you are a brood of vipers to, and the same men that Jesus called whitewashed walls, are the same men Jesus went to the cross and died for. Are you willing to do that to the people that you call a name? If not, then stop. I think that's our response. If we're not, then stop. You're stupid. It's not a good argument. It's just not. But it'll stop them in their tracks. If all you want to be is right, then just yell louder. Yell longer. People get tired. Been there, done that. If you want to be true, look like Jesus. Does that make sense? See, I believe that living as a Christian in the United States comes with a unique challenge. We get a voice in our government, but never at any point in our faith are we called to do something other than present Jesus Christ as our voice. Whatever you do in word or in deed, do all in the name of what makes me feel good. Do all in the name of what intellectually satisfies my... Do all in the name of your political party here. Do all in the name of the Lord. That's what we're called to be. That's what we're called to do. So, here's the hard piece of that. If you're a Republican in this room, I'm not even going to look at you, then you have to love Democrats. And you have to love independents. And you have to love conscientious objectors or abstainers. Because you are a Christian first. And an American second. You're a Democrat. You have to love Republicans. And independents. And those who abstain. And you name it, because you are a Christian first. If you're an independent, you have the hardest job. You have to love Republicans and Democrats. And do you get what I'm saying? None of us are exempt. Our first call is to love. Our first call is to deal with each other with respect. Speak the truth in love. Speak the truth with gentleness and respect. Speak the truth to folks in a way that you seek to debate issues. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Our struggle is with the spirit of the age. And we cannot change hearts if all we can do is shout and name call. We have an incredible opportunity to participate, to vote, to promote truth, and to debate issues. Let's do what God has given it to us to do. Does that make sense? So if it made everybody mad at me, I got someplace to be. I was hoping nobody would want to talk to me. That's what Ephesians 4:15 and 1 Peter 3:15 say in terms of how we respond. Here's the challenge. The challenge is to put 1 Timothy 2:1-2 into practice this week. This is, I think, the best thing we can do. Passage says, "First of all, then I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings, and all who are in high positions." If I was to challenge you today to pick 5 people in the government to pray for, and if I was to ask you to choose 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans and 1 independent, and I was to ask you to say, I want you to pray an intercessory prayer for each one of those. And I want you to pray a prayer of thanksgiving for each one of those. Man, I got to find the guy from the opposite party that's just not that bad if I got to be thankful for him. No. Can we be thankful that God has instituted government? Can we be thankful that we have a chance to surrender in this place in order to live godly lives and to present truth to folks? Are we thankful that we can stand and debate issues while loving the person we're discussing that with, knowing that our goal is not to get them to vote the way that we vote, but to get them to believe in the Jesus Christ who changes lives and who changes hearts and who saves souls? Pray for the kings and all who are in high positions, and then pray that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. And if it's not a challenge, read it again. God gives us opportunity to be His. And it is that opportunity that we share with others. Because the most important thing that we give, and the most important thing that we do, and the most important thing that we live is the presence of Christ in the world. See, God invites us all into that place. And this morning, God is inviting you into that place. If you need to respond to that invitation, we'd invite you to call